She texted her friends. "He's so boring in bed. I'm basically doing charity work." I saw the message over her shoulder. Didn't say a word. Just forwarded it to her mom and her Sunday school group. But that wasn't the most embarrassing part. I, 32M, thought I had the perfect marriage. 6 years together, 3 years married, and what I believed was a solid foundation built on trust and mutual respect. That illusion shattered on a Tuesday evening while she was texting on the couch next to me. The living room was dimly lit, just the glow from the TV and her phone screen. I wasn't trying to snoop. Honestly, I was half asleep watching some mindless show when I caught a glimpse of her screen. The message was brief but devastating. "He's so boring in bed. I'm basically doing charity work at this point." My stomach dropped. I stayed perfectly still, pretending to focus on the television while my world crumbled. She was texting her college friends, the same group that had never really warmed up to me. The same group that made snide comments about my career choice and thought she'd settled when she married me. She continued typing, completely oblivious to my proximity. More messages followed about how she was going through the motions and how she deserved better. Each word felt like a physical blow, but I maintained my composure. Years of working in corporate negotiations had taught me the value of staying calm under pressure. The next morning, she left for her teaching job like nothing had happened. She kissed my cheek goodbye, asked about my day ahead, and reminded me about dinner with her parents that weekend. The normalcy of it all made everything worse. I sat in my home office, staring at my computer screen, unable to concentrate on work. The betrayal wasn't just about the bedroom criticism. It was the casual way she'd mocked our marriage to her friends. The way she'd reduced our relationship to charity work. Then I remembered something that made my blood run cold. Her phone automatically backed up to our shared cloud storage. Everything was there, messages, photos, everything. I'd set it up myself when we got married, thinking it would be convenient for sharing family photos. I accessed the backup and found months of similar conversations. Complaints about my cooking, jokes about my appearance, detailed discussions about how boring I was. Her friends encouraged every criticism, painting me as some pathetic husband she was stuck with. But the worst part was discovering she'd been sharing intimate details about our private life for over a year. Things I thought were sacred between us had become entertainment for her group chat. I spent the day screenshot everything, organizing it chronologically. By evening, I had a complete picture of how my wife really felt about me and our marriage. She came home that night acting completely normal, asking about my day and suggesting we try a new restaurant that weekend. I played along, matching her energy, even managing to smile when she mentioned planning a vacation together. The next day was Wednesday. I knew her routine perfectly. She had lunch with her mother every Wednesday, followed by her weekly Bible study group. Her mother was the kind of woman who valued reputation above everything else, deeply involved in their church community and social circles. I crafted a simple message. "I thought you should see how your daughter really feels about marriage and the values you raised her with." Then I forwarded the entire conversation thread to her mother. But I didn't stop there. Her Sunday school group had a group chat that she'd added me to months ago for coordinating potluck dinners and volunteer activities. Most of these women had known her since childhood, watched her grow up in the church, and held her up as an example of Christian marriage. I forwarded the same screenshots to that group. Then I sent them to her principal, not out of spite, but because several messages contained complaints about her students and inappropriate comments about their parents, things that could genuinely impact her professional standing. Finally, I forwarded everything to her college friends who had been participating in the conversations. I wanted them to know that their private mockery wasn't as private as they thought. After sending everything, I deleted the evidence from my phone and went about my normal day. She had no idea what was coming. The explosion started around 2 p.m. My phone began ringing incessantly. Her mother called first, screaming so loudly I had to hold the phone away from my ear. She was mortified, demanding explanations and threatening to disown her daughter if this was how she really felt about marriage and family values. Then came calls from various church members, her principal requesting an emergency meeting, and several of her college friends who were apparently furious that their private conversations had been exposed. But I was at work in back-to-back meetings, so I let everything go to voicemail. She started calling around 3 p.m. I ignored the first few calls, then finally answered during my coffee break. Her voice was panicked and shaking. She knew exactly what had happened, and was begging me to call everyone back to explain that it was a misunderstanding, that she'd been venting and didn't mean any of it. I told her we'd discuss it when I got home and hung up. The rest of the afternoon, I received texts from her ranging from desperate apologies to angry accusations that I'd violated her privacy. I didn't respond to any of them. Update 1. I drove home that evening knowing everything had changed. Her car was in the driveway, and through the window, I could see her pacing in the living room, phone pressed to her ear. When I walked in, she immediately hung up and confronted me. Her face was red and blotchy from crying, and she demanded to know how I could do something so cruel and vindictive. I remained calm and asked her to sit down. She refused, continuing to pace while explaining how her entire world had imploded in one afternoon. Her mother had called her a disgrace to the family. The Sunday school group had asked her to step down from her leadership position. Her principal had scheduled a disciplinary meeting for the following morning. But the worst part, she said, was that her college friends were furious with her for getting them exposed. Apparently, several of them were married to men who didn't appreciate learning about their wives' group chat conversations. I listened without interrupting until she finished. Then I asked her a simple question. If she was so unhappy with our marriage, why hadn't she talked to me about it? She broke down completely then, admitting that she'd been frustrated and that talking to her friends had become an outlet for her negative feelings. She claimed she'd exaggerated everything, that she was just being dramatic for entertainment value. I asked her if she understood how much her words had hurt me, how betrayed I felt learning that our intimate life had been fodder for group chat entertainment. She insisted it was just harmless venting, that all women complained about their husbands to their friends, and that I'd overreacted by involving other people. That's when I told her about the cloud backup, how I'd been reading months of conversations, not just that one message. Her face went white as she realized the scope of what I'd discovered. I explained that I'd found detailed discussions about our finances, her complaints about my family, jokes about my appearance, and intimate details about our relationship that should have remained private. She tried to minimize it all, saying it was just girl talk, but I could see in her eyes that she knew how wrong it had been. Update 2. The next morning, she left early for her meeting with the principal. I worked from home that day, partly because I needed the space to think, but mostly because I was expecting more fallout. Her mother called me directly around 10 a.m. I'd never heard her so cold and disappointed. She apologized for her daughter's behavior and said she was ashamed of how she'd raised her. The conversation was awkward but revealing. Apparently, her mother had always suspected her daughter had a cruel streak, but had never seen it displayed so clearly. My wife's closest friend from the Sunday school group called next. She was gentler than her mother, but equally disappointed. She mentioned that several marriages in their social circle were now experiencing tension because husbands had seen their wives participating in or encouraging the conversations about me. The principal's meeting didn't go well. When my wife returned home that afternoon, she was devastated. She'd been placed on administrative leave pending a full investigation into her unprofessional comments about students and parents. The school board would make a final decision about her employment within 2 weeks. That evening, we had our first real conversation since everything had blown up. She was exhausted, defeated, and finally ready to be honest. She admitted that she'd been unhappy for over a year, but hadn't known how to address it. Instead of talking to me or seeking counseling, she'd turned to her friends for validation and support. What started as minor complaints had escalated into a pattern of mockery and betrayal. She also confessed that her friends had encouraged her dissatisfaction, constantly telling her she deserved better and that she'd settled by marrying me. Their influence had amplified her minor frustrations into major resentments. I asked her directly if she wanted to save our marriage or if she'd prefer to end it and find someone who met her standards. She broke down again, insisting she loved me and wanted to work things out. She begged for forgiveness and promised to cut contact with her college friends if that's what it took. But I wasn't sure forgiveness was possible. The damage went beyond hurt feelings. She'd fundamentally betrayed our marriage by making our private life public entertainment. Update 3. Over the following weeks, the consequences continued to unfold. Her college friends had completely cut her off, apparently blaming her for their own marital problems. Several of their husbands had demanded to see their wives' phone conversations, leading to serious relationship issues. The church community was divided. Some members supported giving her another chance, while others felt she'd violated the trust and values they held sacred. She'd been quietly asked to step down from all leadership positions and volunteer roles. The school board ultimately terminated her employment. While they couldn't prove the student-related comments had directly impacted her classroom performance, they deemed her behavior unprofessional and potentially harmful to the school's reputation. Financially, we were struggling. Her income had been essential, and finding new employment proved difficult once word spread through our small community's professional networks. But the most significant change was in our relationship dynamic. The power balance had shifted completely. She was now dependent on my income and goodwill, isolated from her support network, and dealing with the professional and social consequences of her choices. I found myself in an unexpected position of control, and I didn't like how it felt. During this time, she suggested couples counseling, which we began attending twice weekly. The therapist helped us unpack years of unaddressed issues and communication failures. In therapy, I learned that my wife's complaints hadn't been entirely unfounded. I had become complacent in our marriage, taking her for granted and failing to prioritize our relationship. Her inappropriate response didn't excuse my own shortcomings, but the therapist also made it clear that her method of handling dissatisfaction, public humiliation rather than direct communication, was deeply destructive and would require significant work to overcome. 3 months after the initial incident, we were both different people. She was humbled, isolated, and desperate to rebuild trust. I was hurt, cautious, and unsure whether our marriage could survive such a fundamental breach of loyalty. The most embarrassing part, as promised in my title, wasn't the public exposure of her complaints about our intimate life. It wasn't the loss of her job or the church scandal or even the collapse of her social circle. The most embarrassing part was that her revenge had backfired completely. In trying to humiliate me privately among her friends, she'd ended up humiliating herself publicly in front of everyone who mattered to her. Her attempt to position herself as the victim of a boring marriage had revealed her as the perpetrator of a cruel betrayal. And the cruelest irony of all, her college friends, the ones who had encouraged her dissatisfaction and convinced her she deserved better, had abandoned her the moment their own relationships were threatened by association with her behavior. She learned the hard way that revenge is a double-edged sword, and sometimes the person wielding it gets cut the deepest. As I write this, we're still in counseling, still trying to rebuild trust, still figuring out whether our marriage can survive what she did and what I did in response. Some days it feels possible, other days it feels hopeless. But one thing is certain, neither of us will ever take our privacy, our loyalty, or our marriage for granted again. The woman who once treated our relationship like charity work now fights every day to prove she deserves a second chance. And I'm still deciding whether to give her one.